Hello, Cinefans. I'm Kendall Groover, and this is Watching Classic Movies. In 1973, filmmaker Bill Gunn's vampire addiction movie, Ganja Hess, was a sensation at the Cannes Film Festival. Starring Duane Jones, Marlene Clark, musician Sam Waymon, and Gunn himself, this mysterious, fascinating film should have been an art house sensation in the States. Instead, it played a single New York theater for 2 weeks before it was pulled and eventually re-edited in a more conventional manner for the exploitation market. I talked with Christopher Sieving, author of Pleading the Blood, Bill Gunn's Ganja Hess, about the film, Gunn's greatest works, and the career this remarkable director, writer, and actor should have had. Welcome, Christopher. Thank you so much for joining me today.
Thank you for having me.
So let's start from the beginning. What brought you to Bill Gunn and Ganja Hess?
Good question. I started writing papers about African American cinema in the 60s and 70s. And I would occasionally come across reviews or articles or books that mentioned Ganja Hess, like James Monaco's book called American Film Now. And in the mid-90s, before DVD, I never really knew if I'd ever have the opportunity to actually see the film. And then very early on in the history of the DVD format, this company, very small independent company, put out a DVD of the original cut of Ganja Hess. It actually was missing one scene at that point, so it was 2 or 3 minutes shorter than the original cut. But otherwise, it was the film. It wasn't the recut version of the film that had been so widely available on VHS in the 80s. Well, usually under the title Blood Couple, but also many other stranger titles. I don't think I even had a DVD player. I bought the DVD, ordered it, and watched it, and watched it again, and it was fascinating. I tried to integrate it into my own teaching. I just started to lecture my own film classes at Wisconsin, and I had in my mind a thought that maybe I'll do something about this film someday. And this is at a point where still pretty much nothing in terms of academic literature had really been written about this film. I discovered, I guess it was actually one of the extras on the original DVD, but there was a very long article in the fanzine Video Watchdog about Ganja Hess in the early 90s, which was far and away the most in-depth feature piece that I'd ever come across about the movie. So my idea to maybe do something related to Ganja Hess went on in the back burner for a while because I was writing a dissertation. And as it turns out, ultimately the dissertation took shape where I decided I would focus on African American cinema or Black themed cinema in the 1960s in general, but all of the chapters would be centered around case studies, individual films that I thought might be representative of larger trends within Black cinema in the 60s. And one of the films I ended up writing about was The Landlord, because Norman Jewison's papers were deposited at the Wisconsin Historical Society. So there were script drafts, and Bill Gunn wrote the script to that film. So the chapter I wrote on The Landlord ended up to a significant degree to be about Bill Gunn's various screenplay drafts. So I did start to do some research about his career. And, after the dissertation was completed, I turned it into a book, about 5 or so years after that. And after the book came out, I was starting to think about a possible second project, and I had already done so much research about Bill Gunn. I think I found a collection of Bill Gunn's personal papers was deposited at the New York Performing Arts Library at Lincoln Center.
And what did you discover there?
Quite a few scripts.
Yes.
There were a couple of drafts from Ganja Hess, one of which seemed like the very earliest draft. There's a lot of dispute over exactly how the whole project initiated. The surviving executive producer says that he was approached by Bill Gunn with an idea for, in his words, for a comedy about vampires. Bill Gunn's partner, Sam Waymon, says that never happened. And I think Bill Gunn himself said that he actually was given a script of some sort called The Vampires of Harlem. That was just trash, but Quinn Kelly, who was, one of the two founders of Kelly Jordan, the production company that backed Ganja Hess, recruited Bill Gunn to rewrite this script and direct it. And that was sort of the raison d'etre behind Kelly Jordan Productions. Was Quentin Kelly and his partner Jack Jordan formed this company this is at the absolute height of the blaxploitation cycle, when all of these Black directed movies and Black cast movies and Black themed movies are making not always spectacular, but very steady profits, no matter how many of these films saturated the marketplace. So Kelly and Jordan wanted to started out as a production company and then became its own distributor, where they would take care of the arty market within the larger Black film market, and that they would, and this largely comes thanks to the various connections that Jack Jordan had made over the years, they would recruit African-American intellectuals and acclaimed or esteemed artists, several of whom were expatriates, to write and direct movies for their company. The very first thing that they did was to produce an original screenplay by Maya Angelou called Georgia, Georgia, which was a relative success when it came out in 1972. And Kelly Jordan soon announced projects. Angelou was slated to direct an adaptation of her own book, I Know Why the Caged Bird Sings. She would have been, I guess, the first African-American woman to direct a commercially released feature film. This is almost 2 decades before Julie Dash and Daughters of the Dust. They signed a contract with James Baldwin to write an original screenplay that he would direct in Europe.
That blows my mind.
Yeah. In fact, I'm working on a conference paper right now about that project. In one sense, it's strange that given, the company's overall objective to make these arty films that were written and directed by these very highly thought of Black writers and artists, and try to corner the market for what they called high quality Black films. They were very much trying to differentiate their projects from the Shafts and the Superflies. So
like the more exploitation kind of genre thing. Okay, yeah. I don't understand how they could be that way. The film it had this amazing reception. So I'm trying to understand how they went from that to kind of dumping it and tell that story. I probably have a better way of telling it.
I guess that is the paradox I was referring to.
Yeah.
Is it that given the objectives, the policies of the company, why would they be interested in a vampire? For many years, people said that Ganja Hess was made in order to cash in on the popularity of the film Blackula, which was an American International Pictures low-budget film, a really interesting film, but widely seen as one of these exploitive rip-offs of Hollywood formulas. You just make, quote unquote, make the faces black, and then you market the film to a largely African-American audience. To say that Kelly and Jordan wanted to turn out something that would cash in on the success of Blackula is not, it can't be true, because Blackula did not even get released until after the shooting had finished. It's still kind of a mystery as to, if it was commissioned or what exactly was the audience that they were thinking about. The film opened in a single Manhattan theater on, I think, 57th Street. It used to be the Playboy Theater. It was part of, for a short time, Hugh Hefner had a very small theater chain. But it's an art theater. It was, the film that was in the Playboy, I think prior to when Ganja Hess premiered, I think was the Roman Polanski film Macbeth. So it was a theater that was patronized by a largely white clientele, a demographic that I think was primarily interested in European films, art films, and also films with relatively graphic representations of sexuality, which has always been a big part of the appeal of art films for this American audience. So yeah, it was opened in an art theater in Midtown Manhattan. I mean, there are so many stories about the film, and specifically about the reception of the film, that have sprung up over the years. And one of the things I try to do in the book is to try and find out the truth of these claims. On the one hand, Kelly Jordan, Quentin Kelly in particular, would claim the film did no business at all. Just no one was showing up to the theater. And Sam Waymon, for his part, remembers that there was actually very good crowds during those 2 weeks. If you go back and look at what Variety reported, and it has the film as doing respectably, I guess, but in retrospect, it does seem like that particular decision with how to distribute the film seems to have been the wrong way to do it, especially because they didn't wait to nurture word of mouth. They didn't wait to build an audience through word of mouth. Unfortunately, the reviews in the New York daily papers and weekly magazines were not positive at all. And Bill Gunn, famously wrote this very angry letter to the New York Times complaining about the treatment that his film had gotten from New York reviewers. So the film was pulled after 2 weeks, probably because Ganja Hess was maybe the one project that Kelly Jordan either had in the works or had ready to go that they thought would make money. Because it was, for one thing, it was the only film project that they had directed by someone who had already made a film. Bill Gunn directed a movie called Stop 3 years earlier for Warner Brothers that actually never got released. It was shelved. It is still very difficult to see to this day, but at least he had a track record. He had actually made a film, and possibly they thought that the genre angle, the genre aspects of the film would attract an audience. But I think they were in a financial position that was pretty precarious, to the point where I think Kelly made a kind of a snap judgment that this is hopeless. He personally hated the film, thought it was a disaster, and he saw no commercial viability in it. So I think he just decided after 2 weeks, that's it, we're pulling the plug, and I'm going to get what I can for this film. And he sold it to another distributor, this exploitation distributor called Heritage. And Heritage brought in a film doctor, an editor who had, a lot of experience editing European imports for American release. And he recut the film, cut out about 45 minutes of footage.
Wow.
Also adding 5 or 6 scenes that Gunn himself had cut from his initial version. So it's only because of the re-edit that we have unused scenes from the film. And what those unused scenes suggest is that, and I think it's been fairly well confirmed, that this film doctor, this editor for Heritage, was trying as best as he could to reconstruct the film according to the final draft screenplay that Gunn turned in. The film that Gunn made is, in some respects, really different from the script. The film is a lot more elliptical. It makes you work. It cuts out a lot of exposition. It obscures character motivations. There's just a lot of things that happen in the film that are difficult to explain. I just showed the film to my students. I teach a horror class, a class on horror cinema, and I showed it recently, and I was just taking questions from students about, what happened there? Like, why did he do this in that scene? It's kind of difficult to follow if you're watching it for the first time. But it's much easier to follow and to understand the motivations of characters from the screenplay. So I think, the Heritage, the editor, was using Gunn's screenplay as his guide for reassembling the film. into something that was somewhat more coherent, but also stylistically less interesting, less evocative.
It's so hard for me comparing the two to make a good assessment because it's so devastating to not have Waymon's music in there for the most part.
Yes.
It completely changes the experience. So I really have a hard time. I almost feel like I need to watch Blood Couple with the sound off someday just to see how maybe the images. But I think you're right that it's interesting that those scenes are captured now.
Yeah.
Because of this version.
And yeah, it would be great if someday there could be a DVD or Blu-ray release that features as extras those scenes that were cut from the original film. I don't think it's possible because the rights to both films they're owned by different people. Chiz Schultz, who's the producer of Ganja Hess, I think is the rights holder to all of Bill Gunn's work. So he has the rights to Ganja and Hess. The film, I'm not sure who has the rights to Blood Couple. It's available to watch on DVD and also YouTube.
Yeah.
Yeah, a lot of the cut scenes are on YouTube. So, yeah, it's a really strange particular text.
It's like they got scared then. They got spooked.
Mm-hmm. Actually, the Spike Lee remake of Ganja Hess that was released 7 or 8 years ago also more or less uses Bill Gunn's script, the final screenplay, as its source, more so than the film.
I think that movie's really valuable for that. I mean, my overall take on Lee's version is that it's kind of like jazz, how people have different takes on it. It's just a different vibe and a different take on it. And, I definitely feel the vibe of the original more, but it is so interesting that he wanted to tell the whole story and he wanted everybody to know about Gunn. I'm trying to think of anybody else of that stature who's given him his flowers, so to speak.
Yeah, I'm not sure. Yeah, I think on the one hand, I probably thought less of the remake than you did. That's probably the result of being so close to the original for so long.
Yeah.
And knowing the various script drafts inside and out. And my initial reaction was more like, I just don't understand the reason for the film.
Yeah.
I'm not sure that
Psycho remake vibes here where it's just so similar, but it's not the same feeling. It's better than that. But I also just think if you have Bill Gunn, Marlene Clark, Duane Jones, and Sam Waymon together in a movie, what are you going to do after that? You really can't remake that.
Yeah, I talked, one of the things I talked to Sam Waymon about during our interview was how he was tangentially involved with Spike Lee's remake. Because, of course, they use his song from Ganja Hess in the remake. And so Waymon was actually present during the church scene.
The best part.
Yeah. And I think made Spike Lee very self-conscious while they were shooting the scene, because they did a few run-throughs or a few takes, and it just wasn't going very well. Sam told me that Spike would occasionally look back. Sam was sitting in a pew far away from the action, and Spike Lee would shoot him a look, and then eventually he would got up and yelled at cast, and like the guy who wrote this song is sitting right over there. You're gonna have to, if you can't get inspired enough to do this right, and pay your respects to the composer, to the guy who did it in the original film. And the next take was the one that they used.
Yeah. I mean, I do appreciate his effort there, but I think maybe in that moment you can see how he realized it was going to be a tribute and maybe not a triumph, but maybe that was never the intention. I kind of wondered that from the beginning, if that was the case. Yeah, that you can't capture that magic. There was a quote by Greg Tate in your book that really haunted me. The attempt to bury Bill Gunn began in his life. Just this feeling that you're too experimental, you're not talking about quote unquote black issues enough. I kind of feel like from the beginning he didn't really have a chance. What would he have done if he could have done what he wanted? Would he have done a kind of European style
art film in America, this moderately popular thing, or do you think he would have ever achieved popular success?
Popular success, I'm not sure if that's, I don't think that would ever have been his goal. I mean, certainly, I think he wanted as many people to experience his work as possible. Not at the expense of making serious concessions or doing something that he didn't want to do. I mean, he did a number of screenplays and television show scripts, more or less for the money. He was momentarily involved with a proposed sitcom for Lena Horne, which was supposed to be produced by the makers or the producers of the Cosby Show, that never developed. And actually, he was supposed to be the head writer on that show, and I think that would have been something that that he would have enjoyed doing, because based on the pilot script, and the series never got up. It's set in a milieu. Lena Horne is playing herself, essentially, kind of a different reality than the one she inhabited. She's Lena Horne, but she's also running this bed and breakfast type hotel in Harlem, and she's it's a very affluent and sophisticated milieu that you would imagine Lena Horne traveled in, and I would imagine that Gunn might have enjoyed developing that basic idea over the course of a number of scripts. Yeah, Greg Tate, his obituary of Bill Gunn, certain lines from that obituary keep popping up in my book, and they even popped up in my previous book when I talk about Bill Gunn's contributions to the landlord. For me, the even richer quote from that obituary is when Greg Tate kind of hypothesizes, imagine a world where Gunn had been allowed to make a film per year after Ganja Hess. What actually happened is it's analogous to if Miles Davis was prohibited from making music after Kind of Blue, or Toni Morrison, was not allowed to write after The Bluest Eye. It's that kind of rupture, that kind of loss is kind of equivalent to what happened with Bill Gunn. And I would imagine, we have a little bit of a sense of how Gunn's art might have developed with the two-part television serial that he did in the late 70s, early 80s, Personal Problems, which is a collaboration with Ishmael Reed, which is a kind of an experimental soap opera, largely set among working and middle class Black families in Harlem. And there are moments in that serial that definitely put you in the mind of, they seem like, yes, absolutely, this is the director of Ganja Hess.
Yeah.
Despite the really inhibiting technological restriction of working with videotape at this time, there's still some really beautifully expressive moments visually throughout the serial. It's difficult to know, with regard to the writing on that show, how much is Reed's, how much is Gunn's, how much just comes from the actors. There's, I believe, a good deal of improvisation, from this wide range of really terrific actors. I guess maybe the clearest picture we might have of how Gunn as a feature filmmaker might have developed is the script for a project, a proposed film called Territory, which I talk about in my book. It's a screenplay that I think he wrote the original draft sometime in the, might even be the late 60s, early 70s.
Oh, early then, okay.
And came back to it several years later, updating these cultural references.
Yeah.
And finally had a filmable script in the early 80s, and actually got pretty far in almost getting this off the ground. So Territory was kind of in the vein of The Landlord.
Which I think shows how he could be a popular success? Because it goes down easy, but it makes you think.
Right. Yeah, it's about, there's 3 or 4 main characters, one of whom is this white multimedia artist who has a couple of lovers, one of whom is a black woman. She has another lover who is a revolutionary, who gets caught up in, he's working for some secretive black nationalist group, gets involved in some sort of assassination. But the tone it is kind of like The Landlord. It's satirical and ironic, and there are moments that are more broadly comic than others, and there are very serious melodramatic moments. And it reads commercial enough that a number of distributors did express interest. I forget who actually greenlit the project, but in 1985, Variety published a short piece saying that production was scheduled to begin on this film with a variety of name actors in the cast and headlined by Geraldine Page. She was going to play the white protagonist, his mother. And it was going to be $2 or $3 million budget. Ed Lackman was going to do the cinematography, and Geraldine Page had just won an Academy Award for The Trip to Bountiful, so she was actually kind of the bankable actor attached to this project, but she died very shortly after. I think that ended the prospects for this film to get made.
It's just also frustratingly out of reach. Like, the more you're talking about this, the more I'm remembering how the book showed us a framework for what could have been. Mm-hmm. It's all laid out, and it just didn't happen. Mm-hmm. I appreciate your work on this, because I do think people still just don't know about Bill Gunn. And I mean, this and then the biography coming out, I really hope we're going to have a Gunnaissance, that people will see what he was. Because even, it's like, even just like, look at Landlord. Maybe we can get Stop out there. I realize this is probably... But that's a truly bizarre work that would be amazing for people to see, Yeah,
there's been some movement in the last few years. Maybe starting with the restoration of Personal Problems, which was a multi-year effort. These were they were shot on video until early 80s, and even professional grade video was not a really stable format. So Kino did a beautiful job restoring what was still there from all of the existing materials that were, as far as I know, collecting dust in Ishmael Reed's garage or attic. And critically speaking, that got a lot of attention when it had its run, starting in Metrograph in 2018. And I think that was the same year that Ganja Hess also got a short theatrical re-release, also starting at Metrograph. It was transferred to DCP, so it played some theaters. I mean, there's been a lot of small victories, like the release of the Ganja Hess soundtrack on vinyl a few years ago, the first time it was ever been available. And The Landlord is a film that I hope that maybe Criterion will do a release, because it is a film that has really steadily been gaining a pretty impressive reputation. A lot of filmmakers, people like Alexander Payne, I think he screened The Landlord for his cast and crew before he made Sideways. Yeah, it's a lot of admirers, and I hope that we eventually get a really high profile DVD Blu-ray release of that film.
Yeah.
Yeah, and then Nicholas Forster's biography is in the works. And yeah, I don't know if I'm the person to do it, but there is a lot of writing that Bill Gunn left behind. A lot of screenplays, a lot of teleplays, a handful of novels. He did publish 2 novels in the course of his life, but there are other works. There are short stories. I talk about one short story that did get published in one of those men's lifestyle magazines in the 60s. I talk about it in my book. There's a lot of writing that could fill a good-sized anthology.
I'm thinking about how Kathleen Collins' daughter put out all that writing. That really did fill out the picture with her a great deal. So I think it would be really significant to do something like that. So before I let you go, I have to know, do you think there's any chance that Stop will ever be released?
It's really confusing. I guess it was about 7 or so years ago that there was an announcement that Warner Home Archive was ready to put out a DVD of Stop, and which I was shocked by, because my research had turned up. Well, I mean, there was a screening of Stop, we know, in 1990, the year after Bill Gunn died. The Whitney did a retrospective of his career and showed a 35 millimeter copy of Stop that apparently came from Warner Brothers' actual archive. And then the story is a little fuzzy. I've read some reports that after that, the print just vanished. I know that whenever Stop is shown at museums, as it has been occasionally over the last couple of decades, it's a dub of a VHS copy, Sam Waymon's copy. It is the version that Warner Brothers commissioned. Bill Gunn, I believe, turned in his final cut of the film. I think it was close to 3 hours. And Warner Brothers took it from him. Someone else edited the film down to 90 minutes. That's the surviving copy, the copy that that is seen today whenever it's seen. So apparently Warner Brothers, someone must have found maybe the original materials, or the 35 print that had been used for the 1990 Whitney screening, and they announced, we're going to put this out, and then it was pulled. The official explanation was that they couldn't work out the music rights. I'm not sure what that entails. I've seen no word since about the fate of this film. Hopefully, I would be delighted if my chapter section on that film reignites interest in finally released.
Just any notice about it at all. Well, Christopher, I really appreciate your work on this and you taking the time to talk to me about this today. I actually am leaving this conversation feeling a little hope that Gunn might get some, recognition that he deserves. So I so much appreciate that.
Thank you. Thank you for inviting me. Really appreciate it.
For more information, including details about Christopher's book, go to watchingclassicmovies.com. Like the show? Rate and review it at Apple Podcasts and share it with your friends. My deepest appreciation to all of you who have already been spreading the word. It really helps. Thank you for listening. This is Kendall Cruver, watching classic movies. Until next time.